Sarah Martinez carefully maneuvered her wheelchair toward the grocery store entrance, her 7-month pregnant belly making the simple task more challenging than usual. The automatic doors slid open with their familiar whoosh, and she breathed in the cool air conditioning that provided relief from the scorching summer heat outside. Her husband Marcus had offered to do the shopping, but Sarah valued her independence and refused to let her disability or pregnancy turn her into someone who needed constant help. She grabbed a shopping cart and began making her way through the produce section, selecting fresh vegetables for the week's meals. Other shoppers moved around her with polite nods and smiles, and Sarah felt grateful for living in a community where people generally treated her with respect and kindness. Her wheelchair had been a part of her life since a car accident 5 years ago, but she had learned to navigate the world with determination and grace. As Sarah reached for a bag of apples on a higher shelf, she felt the familiar flutter of her unborn daughter kicking. She smiled and placed her hand on her belly, whispering softly to the baby growing inside her. The pregnancy had been a blessing she and Marcus had hoped for since their marriage 3 years ago. And despite the additional challenges it presented with her mobility, Sarah embraced every moment of this journey toward motherhood. After filling her cart with groceries, Sarah made her way to the checkout line. The young cashier helped load her bags into the cart's lower rack, where Sarah could easily reach them from her wheelchair. She paid for her purchases and headed toward the exit, looking forward to getting home and preparing dinner before Marcus returned from his business trip. The parking lot was busier than usual for a Tuesday afternoon, with cars backing out of spaces and pedestrians weaving between vehicles. Sarah had learned to be extra cautious in parking lots, as drivers sometimes failed to notice her lower profile in the wheelchair. She stayed alert and moved carefully toward her specially equipped van, which was parked in a designated accessible space near the store entrance. As she approached her vehicle, Sarah noticed a police cruiser parked directly behind her van, blocking her ability to load her groceries or leave the parking space. The officer was nowhere to be seen, and Sarah assumed he had run into the store for something quick and would return shortly. She decided to wait patiently, understanding that police officers sometimes needed to make urgent stops during their duties. Minutes passed, and the officer still hadn't returned. Sarah began to feel uncomfortable sitting in the hot parking lot, especially with her pregnancy making her more sensitive to heat. She looked around for any sign of the officer but saw none. Her phone showed that Marcus would be calling soon for their daily check-in, and she wanted to be home and settled before then. Finally, Sarah decided to find the officer and politely ask him to move his vehicle. She made her way back toward the store entrance, scanning the area for anyone in uniform. The effort required to navigate back across the parking lot in the heat was draining, and she could feel sweat beading on her forehead despite her best efforts to stay cool. Inside the store, Sarah spotted Officer Bradley Thompson standing in the customer service line, apparently dealing with some personal business unrelated to police work. He was a tall man in his mid-30s with an imposing presence that seemed to command attention even in civilian settings. Sarah approached him carefully, not wanting to interrupt but needing to resolve the situation so she could get home. "Officer." Thompson was engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with the customer service representative about returning an item without a receipt. His voice was raised and his body language suggested frustration and impatience. Sarah waited nearby, hoping to catch his attention once he finished his transaction, but the conversation seemed to be escalating rather than resolving. When Officer Thompson finally turned away from the counter, clearly agitated by whatever had transpired, Sarah wheeled her chair forward and spoke in a polite, respectful tone. She explained that his patrol car was blocking her accessible parking space and asked if he could please move it so she could load her groceries and head home. What happened next would change everything and set in motion a series of events that would expose the true character of both the officer and the system he represented. The officer's response was immediate and shocking. Instead of apologizing for the inconvenience or simply agreeing to move his vehicle, Officer Thompson's face darkened with anger. He looked down at Sarah with obvious disdain and began speaking in a tone that was both condescending and hostile, as if her polite request had somehow offended his authority and dignity as a law enforcement officer. Officer Thompson's eyes narrowed as he stared down at Sarah, his frustration from the customer service encounter now redirected toward her. His voice carried an edge of irritation that seemed entirely disproportionate to her simple request. He told Sarah that she would have to wait until he was finished with his business, dismissing her concerns about the heat and her condition with a wave of his hand. The tone he used suggested that he viewed her as an inconvenience rather than a citizen deserving of basic courtesy. Sarah tried to remain calm and reasonable, explaining that she was pregnant and finding it difficult to handle the heat while sitting in the parking lot. She mentioned that she had been waiting for quite some time and simply needed to load her groceries and get home. Her voice remained respectful and patient, even as she felt her heart rate increasing from the stress of the confrontation. The officer's response escalated the situation dramatically. He accused Sarah of being entitled and demanding special treatment because of her disability. His words were harsh and cutting, suggesting that people like her always expected others to cater to their needs. The volume of his voice began to attract attention from other shoppers, who started to gather at a distance, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but unsure whether to intervene. Sarah felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment and shock at the officer's unprofessional behavior. She had encountered discrimination before, but never from someone in uniform who was supposed to serve and protect all citizens equally. She attempted to de-escalate the situation by speaking even more softly and explaining that she wasn't asking for special treatment, just basic access to her own vehicle that was being blocked. Officer Thompson seemed to interpret her calm response as defiance. He stepped closer to her wheelchair, using his height and position to intimidate her further. He began lecturing her about respect for law enforcement and how civilians needed to understand that officers had important work to do. His behavior was becoming increasingly aggressive, and Sarah realized that the situation was spiraling out of control. Other customers in the store were now openly staring at the confrontation. Some pulled out their phones, though whether to call for help or record the incident wasn't clear. The store manager appeared from behind the customer service counter, clearly concerned about the disturbance but hesitant to intervene in what appeared to be a police matter. The tension in the air was palpable, and Sarah found herself wishing she had never approached the officer at all. When Sarah tried to explain once more that she simply needed access to her vehicle, Officer Thompson's patience completely evaporated. He accused her of arguing with a police officer and suggested that her attitude was the reason she was having problems. His words became more personal and cruel, making references to her wheelchair and questioning whether someone in her condition should even be driving or living independently. The officer's comments about her pregnancy were particularly hurtful. He suggested that maybe she should have thought about her limitations before getting pregnant, and that women like her were often irresponsible about their capabilities. The cruelty of his words left Sarah speechless, and she felt tears beginning to form in her eyes despite her efforts to remain strong and composed. At this point, several other customers began speaking up, telling the officer that his behavior was inappropriate and that he should simply move his car. Their intervention seemed to anger Officer Thompson even more, and he began asserting his authority more aggressively, telling everyone to mind their own business and threatening to cite people for interfering with police business. Sarah realized that the situation had become dangerous and unpredictable. She decided to try to leave and find another way home, perhaps calling a friend or family member for help. As she began to turn her wheelchair away from the officer, he grabbed the handle of her chair, preventing her from moving. The physical contact crossed a line that transformed the encounter from verbal harassment into something much more serious. The officer's grip on her wheelchair was firm and controlling, and Sarah felt a wave of fear wash over her. She was trapped, unable to move freely and completely at the mercy of someone who had already demonstrated that he had no respect for her dignity or rights. The baby in her womb seemed to sense her distress, and she felt strong kicks and movement that added to her anxiety about the situation. Officer Thompson began speaking in a low, threatening voice, telling Sarah that she had made a big mistake by challenging his authority. He suggested that there were consequences for people who didn't show proper respect to law enforcement, and that her disability and pregnancy wouldn't protect her from facing those consequences. The menace in his tone was unmistakable, and Sarah realized she was in serious danger. The situation took a terrifying turn when Officer Thompson decided to assert his authority through force. He announced loudly that Sarah was under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting an officer, charges that seemed to come from nowhere given that she had only asked him to move his patrol car. The accusations were so absurd that several witnesses began protesting immediately, but their objections only seemed to fuel the officer's determination to follow through with his threats. Sarah couldn't believe what was happening as Officer Thompson began attempting to remove her from her wheelchair. The process was awkward and dangerous, as he clearly had no training or understanding of how to safely handle someone with her mobility needs. She tried to explain that she needed her wheelchair, and that being separated from it would leave her completely helpless. But the officer dismissed her concerns as more attempts to seek special treatment. The physical struggle that ensued was both humiliating and frightening for Sarah. Officer Thompson's rough handling caused her significant discomfort and pain, particularly given her advanced pregnancy. She worried constantly about the safety of her unborn child as the officer continued his attempts to forcibly arrest her. Several onlookers began shouting for him to stop, with some threatening to call his supervisor or file complaints about his behavior. During this chaotic scene, Sarah managed to reach her phone and quickly sent a text message to her husband Marcus. The message was brief but desperate, simply stating that she was in trouble at the grocery store and needed help immediately. She managed to hit send just before Officer Thompson noticed her phone and confiscated it, claiming it could be used as evidence of her non-compliance with his orders. What Officer Thompson didn't know was that Marcus Martinez was not an ordinary concerned husband. Marcus worked as a special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specializing in civil rights violations and police misconduct cases. He had spent the last 8 years building a reputation as a thorough and relentless investigator who never backed down when he encountered corruption or abuse of power within law enforcement agencies. When Marcus received Sarah's text message, he was in the middle of a briefing at the FBI field office. The urgency in her message immediately caught his attention, and he excused himself to call her back. When her phone went straight to voicemail, his concern escalated to alarm. Sarah always answered his calls, especially when she knew he was worried about her, and the fact that her phone seemed to be turned off or confiscated suggested something serious was happening. Marcus immediately contacted the local police dispatch to inquire about any incidents involving his wife at the grocery store. The dispatcher seemed confused and hesitant to provide information, but eventually confirmed that Officer Thompson had radioed in about an arrest in progress at that location. The vague details provided over the radio made Marcus realize that he needed to get to the scene immediately to assess the situation firsthand. Meanwhile, back at the grocery store, Officer Thompson had managed to get Sarah out of her wheelchair and was attempting to place her in handcuffs. The process was complicated by her pregnancy and the fact that she couldn't support her own weight without assistance. Several witnesses were now openly filming the incident with their phones, and the store manager was frantically trying to contact his corporate headquarters for guidance on how to handle the situation. Sarah's physical discomfort was increasing rapidly as Officer Thompson continued his arrest procedures without any consideration for her medical needs or condition. She began experiencing sharp pains in her abdomen that worried her greatly, and she tried to communicate to the officer that she might be having pregnancy complications that required immediate medical attention. Her pleas were dismissed as another attempt to avoid consequences for her alleged crimes. The crowd of witnesses was growing larger and more vocal in their opposition to what they were seeing. Several people were arguing with Officer Thompson, trying to reason with him and pointing out that his actions seemed excessive and potentially dangerous to both Sarah and her unborn child. Their interventions were making the officer increasingly agitated and defensive, and he began threatening to arrest anyone who interfered with his duties. As Marcus raced toward the grocery store, he was already mentally preparing for what he might find when he arrived. His experience investigating police misconduct had taught him that situations could escalate quickly and unpredictably, especially when officers felt their authority was being challenged. He knew that his arrival would likely change the dynamics of the situation significantly, but he was prepared to use every tool at his disposal to protect his wife and ensure that justice was served. The irony of the situation was not lost on Marcus as he drove through traffic toward the store. Officer Thompson had chosen to abuse his power against someone whose husband made a career of holding law enforcement accountable for exactly this type of behavior. The officer's actions were being witnessed by multiple people and recorded on several devices, creating the kind of evidence that would be nearly impossible to dispute or cover up later. Marcus arrived at the grocery store within 15 minutes of receiving Sarah's text message, and what he found in the parking lot made his blood run cold. His pregnant wife was sitting in the back of a patrol car, still in handcuffs, while Officer Thompson stood nearby talking on his radio. Sarah's wheelchair sat abandoned near the store entrance, and Marcus could see that she was clearly in distress through the patrol car's window. Without hesitation, Marcus approached Officer Thompson and identified himself as a federal agent and Sarah's husband. He presented his FBI credentials and demanded an immediate explanation for why his wife was under arrest. His tone was professional but firm, and it was clear that he expected answers quickly. The sudden appearance of an FBI agent at the scene clearly caught Officer Thompson off guard, and his demeanor shifted noticeably as he realized he was now dealing with someone who understood the law and his rights. Officer Thompson attempted to maintain his authority by explaining that Sarah had been arrested for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. However, when Marcus pressed for specific details about what actions had led to these charges, the officer's explanations became vague and contradictory. Marcus noted that several witnesses were still present and appeared eager to share their versions of events, which would likely paint a very different picture than the one Officer Thompson was presenting. The federal agent in Marcus immediately began documenting everything he observed. He noted the time of his arrival, the condition in which he found his wife, the location of her wheelchair, and the presence of multiple witnesses with phones and recording devices. His training kicked in as he began treating this like any other civil rights investigation. Despite his personal emotional investment in the outcome, Marcus demanded that Officer Thompson immediately remove Sarah's handcuffs and allow her to return to her wheelchair, citing her medical condition and the potential danger to both her and their unborn child. When the officer hesitated and began arguing about proper procedures, Marcus made it clear that he was prepared to contact his supervisor at the FBI and initiate an immediate federal investigation into the incident if his wife wasn't released and given proper medical attention within the next few minutes. The threat of federal involvement seemed to penetrate Officer Thompson's consciousness in a way that the protests of civilian witnesses had not. He began to realize that his actions were going to face scrutiny from investigators who had the power and authority to hold him accountable in ways that local internal affairs departments might not. The confident arrogance he had displayed earlier began to crack as the implications of his behavior started to sink in. Meanwhile, Sarah was struggling with increasing physical discomfort in the back of the patrol car. The stress of the arrest, combined with being separated from her wheelchair and forced into uncomfortable positions while handcuffed, was taking a toll on both her and the baby. She could feel her daughter moving frantically inside her womb, and she worried that the trauma of the experience might trigger premature labor or other complications. Marcus observed his wife's condition through the patrol car window and became increasingly concerned about her well-being. He demanded that Officer Thompson call for an ambulance immediately, explaining that his wife needed medical evaluation after being subjected to unnecessary physical stress during her pregnancy. The officer's reluctance to call for medical assistance only added to the growing list of problems he was creating for himself. Several witnesses approached Marcus and introduced themselves, offering to provide statements about what they had observed. Their accounts were remarkably consistent, describing Officer Thompson's behavior as aggressive, unprofessional, and completely disproportionate to anything Sarah had done. Multiple people had video recordings of various parts of the incident, creating a comprehensive record of the officer's misconduct. The store manager also approached Marcus, expressing his concern about what had happened in his establishment and offering full cooperation with any investigation that might follow. He mentioned that the store's security cameras had likely captured much of the incident, both inside the store and in the parking lot area. This additional evidence would provide an objective record of events that would be difficult for Officer Thompson to dispute or explain away. As Marcus continued to document the scene and gather witness information, he was also mentally preparing for the complex legal and administrative processes that would follow. His experience with civil rights cases had taught him that police misconduct incidents often involved multiple layers of accountability, from local internal affairs investigations to federal civil rights prosecutions. He knew that this case had the potential to become a significant legal matter, with far-reaching consequences. Officer Thompson was beginning to understand that he had made a serious mistake. The arrival of an FBI agent had transformed what he had probably viewed as a routine arrest into a potential career-ending incident. His attempts to justify his actions were becoming less confident, as he realized that his explanations were being evaluated by someone with extensive knowledge of police, procedures and civil rights law. The crowd of onlookers continued to grow as word of the incident spread through the shopping center. Many people were expressing outrage at what they had witnessed, and some were already talking about contacting news media outlets to report on the story. The incident was clearly going to attract attention far beyond the immediate participants, and Officer Thompson was going to find himself at the center of a public controversy that would be difficult to escape. The arrival of the ambulance that Marcus had insisted upon marked a turning point in the incident. The paramedics immediately assessed Sarah's condition and expressed concern about the stress she had been subjected to during her arrest. They recommended immediate transport to the hospital for a full evaluation, given her advanced pregnancy and the physical and emotional trauma she had experienced. Their medical opinion provided additional evidence that Officer Thompson's actions had put both Sarah and her unborn child at risk. As Sarah was being prepared for transport to the hospital, Marcus made several important phone calls. His first call was to his supervisor at the FBI, briefing him on the situation and requesting that the Bureau open an immediate investigation into the incident. His second call was to the police department's Internal Affairs Division, formally notifying them that a federal agent was alleging misconduct by one of their officers. His third call was to a civil rights attorney he had worked with on previous cases, ensuring that Sarah's legal interests would be protected from the beginning. Officer Thompson watched these developments with growing anxiety. The incident that had started as what he probably viewed as a minor confrontation with a difficult civilian had now escalated into a situation involving federal investigators, internal affairs, lawyers, and medical professionals. The casual arrogance he had displayed earlier was completely gone, replaced by the dawning realization that his career and future were now in serious jeopardy. The hospital examination revealed that while Sarah and the baby were physically unharmed, the stress of the incident had caused elevated blood pressure and other symptoms that could have led to serious complications if the situation had continued much longer. The doctor's report would become crucial evidence in demonstrating that Officer Thompson's actions had created genuine medical risks for both mother and child, undermining any arguments that his behavior had been harmless or justified. Meanwhile, Marcus began the process of formally documenting the incident for his FBI supervisor. His report was thorough and professional, detailing every aspect of what he had observed and learned from witnesses. He included information about the multiple video recordings that had been made by bystanders, the store's security footage, and the medical documentation from Sarah's hospital evaluation. The comprehensive nature of his documentation would make it difficult for anyone to dismiss or minimize the incident later. Within hours of the incident, news of what had happened began spreading through social media channels as witnesses shared their videos and accounts of Officer Thompson's behavior. The story of a police officer mistreating a disabled, pregnant woman whose husband turned out to be an FBI agent quickly gained traction online, drawing attention from civil rights organizations, disability advocacy groups, and media outlets across the region. The police department found itself under immediate pressure to respond to the growing controversy. The chief of police was forced to issue a public statement acknowledging that they were aware of the incident and were cooperating with both internal and federal investigations. The department's reputation was already being damaged by the public attention, and officials knew that their handling of the situation would be closely scrutinized by federal authorities. Officer Thompson was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of multiple investigations. His personnel file was reviewed, revealing several previous complaints about his treatment of civilians, though none had resulted in serious disciplinary action. The pattern of behavior suggested that the incident with Sarah might not have been an isolated occurrence, but rather part of a longer history of unprofessional conduct that had been overlooked or inadequately addressed. Local disability rights organizations seized upon the incident as an example of the discrimination and abuse that people with disabilities often face from law enforcement. They organized protests outside the police station and called for comprehensive training programs to ensure that officers understand how to interact appropriately with disabled individuals. Their advocacy brought additional public attention to the case and increased pressure on officials to take meaningful action. Civil rights attorneys from across the state began contacting Marcus and Sarah, offering their services for what was clearly going to be a significant federal lawsuit. The combination of Marcus's FBI connections, the extensive evidence available, and the clear-cut nature of the civil rights violations made this an attractive case for attorneys who specialize in police misconduct litigation. The potential financial consequences for the city and police department were substantial. Marcus took a leave of absence from his FBI duties to focus on supporting his wife and ensuring that the investigation proceeded properly. While his colleagues would handle the federal investigation to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest, his expertise and connections within the Bureau ensured that the case would receive the thorough attention it deserved. The irony that Officer Thompson had chosen to abuse someone married to one of the investigators who specialized in exactly these types of cases was not lost on anyone involved. Sarah, despite the trauma she had experienced, was determined to see the case through to its conclusion. She understood that her incident could serve as an important precedent for protecting other disabled individuals from similar treatment by law enforcement. Her willingness to pursue justice despite the personal cost and public attention it would bring demonstrated the same strength and determination that had helped her overcome the challenges of her disability and build a successful life. The incident had transformed from a simple request to move a patrol car into a federal case that would ultimately change policies and procedures for law enforcement interactions with disabled individuals. Officer Thompson's moment of poor judgment and abuse of power had set in motion a series of events that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. 6 months after the incident, the consequences for Officer Thompson and the police department had become clear and severe. The federal investigation led by the FBI had uncovered a pattern of civil rights violations that extended far beyond Sarah's case. Internal documents revealed that the department had received numerous complaints about Thompson's behavior over the years, but had consistently failed to take appropriate disciplinary action. This pattern of negligence by supervisors became a central focus of the federal prosecution. Officer Thompson was formally charged with violating Sarah's civil rights under federal law, a felony that carried the potential for significant prison time and the permanent loss of his law enforcement certification. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including multiple video recordings from witnesses, security camera footage from the store, medical records documenting Sarah's condition, and testimony from numerous eyewitnesses who had observed his unprofessional conduct throughout the incident. The civil lawsuit filed by Sarah and Marcus against both Officer Thompson and the police department resulted in a substantial settlement that exceeded $2 million. More importantly for Sarah, the settlement agreement required the police department to implement comprehensive training programs on disability awareness and proper procedures for interacting with disabled individuals. The department also agreed to create a civilian oversight committee with authority to review complaints about officer conduct. Sarah gave birth to a healthy daughter 3 months after the incident. Despite the doctor's initial concerns about potential complications from the stress she had experienced, the baby was named Hope, symbolizing Sarah's determination to turn her traumatic experience into something positive that could help protect other vulnerable people from similar treatment. The birth provided a healing moment for both Sarah and Marcus after months of legal proceedings and public attention. The incident had a profound impact on police, training protocols across the state, and eventually influenced national standards for law enforcement interactions with disabled individuals. Sarah was invited to speak at police academies and training seminars, sharing her experience and helping officers understand the importance of treating all citizens with dignity and respect, regardless of their physical capabilities or appearance. Officer Thompson's criminal trial became a landmark case in civil rights enforcement. He was ultimately convicted on federal charges and sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. The conviction sent a strong message to law enforcement officers throughout the region that abusing citizens with disabilities would result in serious federal consequences, not just minor administrative penalties. The police chief who had overseen the department during Thompson's employment was forced to resign amid revelations that he had been aware of multiple complaints against the officer, but had failed to take appropriate action. His departure led to significant reforms in the department's internal affairs processes and a new emphasis on accountability for supervisors who fail to address problem officers before they cause serious harm to community members. Marcus returned to his FBI duties with an even stronger commitment to investigating civil rights violations by law enforcement officers. The personal experience of seeing his wife victimized by police misconduct gave him additional insight and motivation in his professional work. He became a frequent speaker at law enforcement conferences, sharing the lessons learned from Sarah's case and advocating for better training and accountability measures. The grocery store where the incident occurred implemented new policies for handling situations involving law enforcement on their property. Store managers received training on when and how to intervene if they witness inappropriate conduct by officers, and the company developed partnerships with disability advocacy organizations to ensure that their facilities remain accessible and welcoming to all customers. 3 years after the incident, Sarah and Marcus established a nonprofit organization dedicated to advocating for the rights of disabled individuals who encounter problems with law enforcement. The organization provides legal support, training materials, and advocacy services to help ensure that other families don't have to endure the trauma and injustice that they experienced. Their work has helped dozens of other victims seek justice and has contributed to policy changes in multiple jurisdictions. Officer Thompson's conviction and imprisonment served as a deterrent to other law enforcement officers who might be tempted to abuse their authority when dealing with vulnerable populations. The case became a frequently cited example in legal training materials and civil rights litigation, demonstrating that federal prosecutors are willing to pursue serious charges against officers who violate citizens' constitutional rights. The incident ultimately strengthened Sarah and Marcus's marriage and their commitment to fighting for justice. While they would never have chosen to endure such a traumatic experience, they were able to transform their pain into purpose by working to prevent similar incidents from happening to others. Sarah's courage in pursuing the case despite the personal cost and public scrutiny helped establish important legal precedents that continue to protect disabled individuals from police misconduct. The legacy of that day in the grocery store parking lot extends far beyond the immediate participants. Officer Thompson's moment of poor judgment and abuse of power led to meaningful reforms in police training, accountability measures, and civil rights enforcement that have benefited countless individuals. Sarah's refusal to accept mistreatment and Marcus's expertise in civil rights law combined to create a powerful force for positive change in law enforcement practices and attitudes toward disabled community members.